It's TransGiving. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to have cooked tonight. We have a really special menu planned, which I hope you've begun sampling already. But I want to introduce two very special speakers that we have with us tonight. The first is KELLE CARBONE. Kelly is a 24-year-old New Jersey native. By day, he works as an instructional paraprofessional in a middle school special education classroom.
And I am one of the models with Trans Models New York City. In addition to that, my day job, I work as an educator in a middle school with special education students. And by night, I'm a graduate student at Rutgers University where I study gender and sexuality. So, what all of that means is I spend a whole lot of time thinking about a whole lot of different things regarding sexuality, regarding bodies, regarding how can we disrupt common notions of what it means to be human. So for this talk, when I was asked to speak about the trans experience, talk about the trans community, I started to think a lot about what are the main things that we think about in public conversations about the trans community. What are the common narratives and themes that get brought up? And how can we kind of turn them on their head and question them and not just accept them for face value? So I came up with three things that I think we often talk a lot about, but we don't necessarily interrogate them maybe as much as we should. And the first narrative I wanted to discuss is this notion of trans people inhabiting the wrong body. We hear this all the time, and as trans people, we use this as a way to gain legitimacy in the medical realm. We've been fed this idea of, you're living in the wrong body, and that's why it's legitimate for you to feel this way. And I'd have to say, as much as that can be useful to gain, access to healthcare, to gain access to surgeries and hormone treatment, and to just get approval from family, right? Because it's so ironic that we'd rather be diagnosed with a neurological disorder than to put our rationality into question, right? So, as much as it can be a useful tool and we navigate the system using this, it's also highly problematic. Because what it implies is that the body is inherently sexed. And what it also implies is that you can exchange one body for another body. You can exchange a male body for a female body, or vice versa. Coming through this process, we come to realize you're not really changing your body. You're not bringing it and exchanging it. There's no return receipt, right? You're altering parts. You're altering parts to make you feel more comfortable in your own skin. And I can attest to feeling like a foreigner in my own body. However, this skin is still mine. My kidneys are still my kidneys. It's just a merely alteration of certain parts. And what that also implies is that there's only two types of bodies. There's male bodies and there's female bodies. And you're merely going from one to the other. When in reality, we need to start thinking about what are the implications for bodies. If we're not changing one for another and we're just altering them, what does that mean? And I think for me, what it means is we talk a lot about in sexuality studies, we talk a lot about gender. There's this discussion of genders between your ears and sexes between your legs. And that's if we even make a distinction between gender and sex. But often we have that distinction. I feel like now, where we are in 2015, a lot of people know the difference, right? There's gender and there's sex. And we kind of keep them, gender is cultural, sex is biological, and that's that. And I agree up until a point. I do think that gender is socialized and gender is culturally constructed. However, I'd venture to argue, I think in a large way, sex is too. And I don't think that that's something discussed a lot. I think that we look at sex as something that's concrete. But when I started to explore this more, I started to think about, well, how can sex be more like gender? How is sex socially constructed? And I asked the question, what body parts can we make a distinction between male and female? I mean, everyone's thoughts go to genitalia or breasts, but think about it. Someone, let's say, who has breasts might not necessarily be a man or vice versa. right? We think about such these hard lines, black and white. But do we gender noses, or hands, or shoulders? Not so much. Even if you want to take it on a genetic level, we have this XX and XY, and that's it. We tend to fail to recognize all the variation, even on a genetic level, that boils down to sex. What happens if someone's XXY or XXYY? There's so many variations, and this is why we tend to snuff out the intersex community, which is not even spoken about. And I think what it boils down to is that social practices, not body parts, are the foundation of sex attribution. And bodies lie on a continuum. So that's definitely a point I'd like to explore tonight at our table conversations. Another big narrative that I thought about, in addition to this, is the idea of the before and after photo that we see commonly with the trans experience. Everyone's done it. I've done it. You know, looking back at old photos of, wow, like this is what I used to look like. And this is what I look like now. Only in 8 months. That's crazy, right? And this can be incredibly empowering to see how far we've come. But it also tends to leave out a lot. We don't recognize the middle era of a transition, number one, first and foremost. But it fails to recognize the present and the beauty of embracing that. You know, I know for me, being so in the early stages, I'm still in relatively early stages. I'm still experiencing a lot of big changes, only being 8 months in testosterone. So I'm still waking up every morning like, who is that? Where did he come from? So there's still this middle. And I catch myself sometimes, I'm like, I just want to be at that after photo point. I just want to be a year on T. I want to see what that looks like. I just want to be at that after point. And I stopped myself. And I said, you're going to get there. But think about it. You're only going to have this time right now. We only have time, really, at the end of the day. That's all any of us have is time. And I think about it, too. It's not just trans people who are in transition, right? Cis or trans, everyone's always evolving. None of us in this room truly have an after photo. We're constantly changing. And for that, I feel that we can find there's a power in embracing yourself as you are, loving yourself in the moment, while still maintaining that potential for future, always growing. I think another part, though, when we think of present, we think of future. There's a lot of talk, at least I've encountered. It's kind of, forget about the past. It's in the past. Let's not talk about it. We need to, don't dwell on it. And a lot of times, in my experience with the trans people that I know, in my own personal experience, we try to distance ourselves from who we were. Like, I don't want to look at photos of who I was, or I don't want to share that person. And I think about the implications of that. What does it mean to cut off a part of yourself? What does it mean to forget? For some, that could be a really good thing. You forget some dark hours. But there's something to be said for taking those times and learning from them. I used to push my past self away. That girl, that woman, didn't want to know her. But then I realized, you know what? If it wasn't for her being strong, if it wasn't for her courage, if it wasn't for that girl's strength, taking risks, not being afraid to be herself, despite all the obstacles, I wouldn't be standing here today. I wouldn't be even half the person I am right now. So I deeply admire that woman. And I think we should all embrace who we were, who we are now, first and foremost, but where we're going. And realize that we're always improving, we're always evolving, we're always in transition. And I think with that mindset, the thought of everyone is in transition, it makes everyone realize, you know, we're not that different. We're kind of all in the same boat, right? Just because I'm changing with my body doesn't necessarily make me different. It just gives me a unique perspective. Now, the third point I really started to explore was this idea of being a trans person, being visible as a trans person. There's something incredibly empowering in that. And embracing my trans identity has opened so many doors for me. Not to mention with the help of trans models in New York City, but in general, living authentically has attracted so much positive light into my life. However, there's a danger in merely reducing yourself to a trans identity. There's a danger in being seen as merely a trans man, right? Because it reduces and cuts out all the other parts of yourself. And I think oftentimes that's what tends to happen. People see me, they see trans. They don't see anything else. They don't see educator, student. They don't see these things. And I think what's important to remember is that we don't have one-sided identities. We all have fractured identities. And there's a great power in understanding that we all have fractured identities because it builds connections. I may have a connection with every single person in this room in a different way due to our fractured identities, our multifaceted identities. And what that does is that encourages us to build coalitions and create a more inclusive sense of community. Because it doesn't just isolate the trans community, like, oh, you're all different. We can't relate to you. No, we don't understand. There's ways to make these bridges and realize that we're all, at the end of the day, human. Right? We're all going through similar struggles. We all face oppressions in some way or another. And we can relate. Now, as an educator, I try to instill this in my students. We're all the same. My students, I teach students with special education. And a lot of times, they're left out. Their difference is picked out, and they're left out. And I can relate to them on a level that's really deep. I understand in a really interesting way. I think my perspective as a trans man helps me do that. And there's two stories I want to share with you that stand out to me in terms of teaching them about differences in people, but how people lie on continuums. And there's a spectrum. So the first story, as last year, I was actually early in my transition, maybe like a month. And my student was in second grade. And he turned to me the one day out of nowhere and he said, "Are you a boy or are you a girl?" In all seriousness, genuine question, really didn't know. And I'd been with him all school year. This had never come up. And I said, "I'm a teacher." And he looks and he thinks about it and he says, "All right, are you a boy teacher or a girl teacher?" And I said, "I'm a person teacher." And thought about it, he's like, "All right, no problem." Another student came in the next day and asked him the question, "Is that a boy or a girl?" And he goes, "It's a person." He remembered it, but he thought about it. It was like, wow, I'm in second grade. This child's 7 and understands the concept of we don't have to be black or white, but people can just be people, and it's totally acceptable. Another story, more recently, a couple months ago, I've gotten moved now. I work with 6th grade boys, which is definitely an interesting experience. Working in middle school in general, I would say requires a special amount of patience at that age. But working where I do with boys as a trans man is really interesting. You know, they're coming into manhood in a way, and I'm teaching them how to do this. I'm facilitating this, right? And I'm learning it with them. We're going through puberty like all together. That's great. So it was Superhero Day, and I went and dressed as Captain America, the whole thing. My students were talking, and one of them says to the other, "You know, Robin used to be a girl?" I said, "I've never heard that before. That's new to me. Didn't know Robin was a girl." "Yeah, Robin was a girl." I was like, "All right, this is a teachable moment." I said, "Well, what about in real life? Can a girl become a boy?" And they sat around and they thought about it. They're like, "Yeah, why not? No big deal." And I said, "Okay, what about a boy? Can a boy become a girl?" "Sure, why not?" Not a question. And that amazed me because these are kids who are so young, 12. And to them, the possibility of traversing between gender, changing, no big deal. Shrug of the shoulders, not a question. And I'm thinking, how beautiful is that? Can we just tap into that and share that with everyone? You know, and that's my hope with education, is that I want to be able to cultivate those thoughts, talk about those things, talk about, well, does long hair in a boy mean he's still a boy, and vice versa. And I have these conversations with my students because at a young age you're cultivating this idea that, wow, yeah, there aren't definitive indicators of who's who and what's what. And I think that's the beauty of what we're doing here. You know, our bodies are kind of a way of bending, breaking, and unraveling gender binaries. And I think that's the beauty of Trans Models New York, is that we are kind of displaying, right? When you think of what is a model, does anyone have a definition of what a model is?
A breathing mannequin.
A breathing mannequin? All right.
Size 0.
A model displays as a visual aid products. And I think what we're displaying here is we're displaying the complexity of gender. We're displaying the beauty of diversity. And we're displaying what it really means to be human. So with that, I'd like to thank you all. And I hope you enjoy your meal. Thank you all for coming.